Ever since that post-credit scene in Venom,
there's gonna be carnage.
We expected to see Carnage on the big screen. Okay, well, more like when the sequel was officially announced, cause you never know with movies. Now that we've finally seen proof of Carnage in all his monstrous glory, we thought we'd take a deep dive into the character and go over something you may not know about him, such as his origins, his powers, his inspiration, and the character he nearly killed off once and for all. Let's take a look. Let's start with Carnage's origin and how the character came to be. When Venom showed up in 1988, the symbiote quickly grew a cult following and became so popular that Marvel decided to ride the character's success by introducing some more symbiotes into the mix. That's when Carnage stepped in, with the character being created by writer David Michelinie and artists Eric Larson and Mark Bagley, with him making his debut back in 1992's Amazing Spider-Man number 360 and his first full appearance in number 361. Despite Venom already being somewhat of an anti-hero, with him eating people and all, Carnage was introduced to be an even darker character, and this is shown with the person he merged with. While Venom attached himself to reporter Eddie Brock, Carnage merged himself with unhinged serial killer Cletus Kasady, who was dangerous enough before his Carnage days. Kasady was pretty deranged from the beginning, with him having a troubled childhood, which included him torturing his own dog for amusement, dark, and even killing his grandmother by pushing her down the stairs. Kasady then wound up in a group home for boys after being orphaned, but he didn't last too long there, with him killing the home's administrator along with a girl who refused to date him before torching the place to the ground. This led Kasady to be sentenced to 11 lifetime consecutive terms and sent to Rikers prison, where he became one with Carnage. But how did that happen exactly? Well, despite Venom and Carnage being rivals in the comic books, Carnage is actually the offspring of Venom. While Eddie Brock was sent to prison for his crimes as Venom, the symbiote managed to reproduce asexually, with it breaking off and becoming its very own entity. Searching for a host, the offspring headed back to Brock's cellmate, Cletus Kasady, entering him through a cut before fusing into his bloodstream and subsequently becoming a permanent part of his genetic makeup. Unlike Eddie and Venom, because of the way he fused himself to Cletus, the two became one and the same as opposed to two separate entities, and Cletus turns into an even more violent and powerful creation. Now, despite Carnage being an offshoot of Venom, he actually turns out to be much more powerful than his old man, due to the fact that, well, he merged with a psychopathic killer like Cletus as opposed to a journalist like Eddie, as well as the fact that he had a longer time to adapt to its environment. Overall, Carnage is a more dangerous version of Venom, with him having a greater amount of strength, speed, and agility, but most importantly, the ability to regenerate and heal himself so he can regrow limbs and organs that have either been destroyed or damaged during combat. Perhaps his most dangerous weapon is the fact that he can form weapons out of the cellular structure of his body, such as using his tendrils as deadly weapons and shooting them as projectiles, or shaping his hands into axes and stabbing weapons. Put these powers in the hands of a homicidal maniac and you have a villain who is willing and able to do basically any depraved thing they want. And Carnage has caused many problems for his rivals Venom and Spider-Man in the past, beating them both in combat. So to take down Carnage, Venom and Spider-Man formed an uneasy alliance, as Spidey realized he couldn't take Carnage out on his own. In the comics, he reluctantly enlisted Venom to help him, and they decided to take the Red Devil down once and for all. After initially losing the fight, they eventually managed to use their combined power to best Carnage, sending him back to jail once again. Although with this being comics, he wasn't behind bars for too long and was back causing mayhem before you know it. But Cletus isn't the only character Carnage has bonded with in the comics, with him combining to form Spider Carnage, Cosmic Carnage, and in one of the best storylines, even forming with Norman Osborn to become the Red Goblin. But one of the biggest comic book storylines involving Carnage was the event known as Maximum Carnage, which saw the character crossing over with a number of different Spidey-related titles. The event saw Carnage teaming up with a number of other rogues in Marvel's catalog, such as Carry-On, Demogoblin, Doppelganger, and Shriek, and the result of their alliance led them to basically conquer New York City and kill off a number of top-level heroes until they were eventually stopped. Despite Carnage being a popular character and a formidable adversary to the likes of Venom and Spider-Man, he did eventually meet his end in the comics. That's because in 2004, Marvel were becoming concerned that the character was being overused and that fans would become fatigued. So they decided to kill him off, having Robert Reynolds, aka Sentry, ripping him in half and leaving him for dead floating in space. But again, seeing as how this is comics, no one is really truly gone, and it wasn't too long before Carnage was back, causing mayhem, as he tends to do once again. So while Carnage may have been created due to the popularity of Venom, the character was actually brought in to replace Eddie Brock and be one of several hosts brought about from his death. The initial plan was to introduce Carnage for the very first time in the Amazing Spider-Man issue number 400 after the death of Eddie Brock, while his symbiote bonded with a whole host of other people like Cletus Kasady and this new army posing a threat for Spider-Man. But because Venom and Eddie Brock were so popular and loved by fans, Marvel had a change of heart and decided to spare the character and instead create a brand new offshoot with, as we mentioned earlier, Venom reproducing and having his offspring bond with Cletus. While Cletus Kasady is a pretty famous deranged psychopathic comic book character, there's one character who fits the description that is even more famous: the Joker.
See?
The Clown Prince of Crime is a huge character that has been emulated many times, and there are a number of characters with similar character traits. In fact, there are quite a few parallels between Cletus and the Joker, and there's a good reason for that. The Joker was one of the main inspirations for Cletus's persona. Comic book artist and creator of Kasady, Eric Larson, admitted that while Carnage is modeled on Venom, the Joker was the main reference for Kasady. While we know the character as Carnage now, the name was actually Marvel's third choice. The first name they planned to go with was Chaos, as it seemed like a suitable choice for a character who leaves nothing but destruction in his wake, but they decided it didn't have enough gravitas and ended up opting for Ravage. However, Marvel then again decided against this name as it didn't have a very supervillain feel, so they decided to change it, this time settling once and for all on Carnage. Carnage and Cletus may be one and the same, but at one point in the comics, Venom is able to separate Cletus and the alien organism that runs through his blood due to the connection he has with the symbiote, and reabsorbs the organism for good, leaving Cletus to just be an, ordinary psychopath once again. However, Cletus wasn't all too pleased with having his powers taken from him, and in a moment of desperation, to be seen as all-powerful, he painted himself red and went on another bloody rampage until he was defeated by Spider-Man again. While he did fuse with the symbiote again, this shows, this guy's crazy, alright? And finally, while this may be Carnage's debut on the big screen, he has appeared in the 1994 Spider-Man the Animated Series, and showed up in Spider-Man Unlimited and Ultimate Spider-Man. Also has a number of game titles under his red belt. Is that a belt? I'm gonna use belt loosely.